Greetings, my name is Martin Case, your host for Hobsons Bay ArtSpeak, an interview forum that puts a creative lens on the art of interviewing with a series of interviews with artistic directors, composers, and performing musicians who reside in Hobsons Bay. Today we are welcoming Richard Vella, multimedia composer, author, and academic. Welcome, Richard.
Hello.
From 2008 to 2013, Richard Vella was head of the School of Creative Arts at the University of Newcastle. From 2007 to 2019, he was chair and professor of music at the University of Newcastle Conservatorium of Music. Richard is presently a conjoint professor at the University of Newcastle, conducting full-time research. Through CCAR, he was the artistic director of the International Space-Time Concerto Competition in 2012, and from 2013 to 2019, Richard Vella directed the interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research group, the Collaborative Environments for Creative Arts Research, known as CCAR. Through CCAR, he also was awarded in 2015 an Australian Research Council linkage grant in partnership with Monash University, the Australasian Performing Rights Association, and the Australia Council for the Arts. The industry report for this project was completed in July 2019. Born Global Australian Music Exports examines the national and international policy frameworks, new business models, and the music entrepreneur and export values of Australian music. Today we're going to talk about multimedia collaboration, the compositional process, latency issues and synchronized global performances, the value of the Australian music export, and more. Richard, there's a lot to cover here, and I'm looking forward to digging into these layers, which I think can be broken down for today's conversation into three main categories: your compositional works, your work of CCAR, and your educational publications and contributions, which we will also be exploring. I think we're also keen to hear about your perspectives on the current pandemic and how has it impacted your organizational affiliations and you personally as an artist. To begin, I hear you are a new resident of Hobsons Bay, and welcome. How are you finding the neighborhood?
Well, I've only been here since April, and unfortunately, I moved interstate at the start of the lockdowns and everything. So I haven't really discovered much around the area other than there's lots of great walks, and it's a very beautiful location. I live down near the Yarra River side of Newport, and it's a really lovely area to be in. The neighbours are terrific, but as I said, because of it's mainly been through lockdowns, it's really, life has just been going to Bunnings and eating at home and walking the dogs.
Now, you are from Newcastle. Where are you from originally?
Melbourne. I was brought up in Ascot Vale, and my family's all around Melbourne, a lot on this side of town. Okay. And that's one of the reasons why I've come back to Melbourne, is for family reasons.
That makes sense.
And also for coming back, it sort of signifies the next creative stage of my life.
Nice, brother. I'd like to talk about some of your film compositions. And as a composer, Richard Vella's diverse output includes works for orchestra. This is a massive list. Orchestra, large ensemble, choir, film, chamber music, burlesque cabaret, music theater, site-specific performances, and popular music genres. Much of his music has been commissioned, performed, and recorded nationally and internationally. Vella's film credits include Light Years, Parklands, Renzo Piano Piece by Piece, for which he won the 1999 Australian Screen Composers Award for Best Music for a Documentary. His feature music score, Travelling Light in 2003, received the nomination for the Best Music for a Feature Film by the Australian Film Institute. Let's take a look at some of his compositions.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Batman! Here I am, hot and ready.
hot, remote and ancient country of the Finke River Valley in Central Australia.
Richard, Mr. Strelow's films followed the life story and the work of Australia's preeminent and most controversial anthropologist and linguist, Ted Strelo. It traces his life from the childhood at Hermannsburg and as the son of a Lutheran missionaries to his days as a patrol officer and translator in Central Australia. You knowing the history, being Australian, what were your feelings about working on this project?
It was a really, of all the stuff I've done, I found it one of the most pleasant ones to do. But at the start it was challenging because it was about sacred objects. The film's about the archive of sacred objects that Strelo had collected and which were unfortunately auctioned off after he died. And so the task I was given was to obviously be the film composer, but when you're dealing with Aboriginal music, it raises really ethical questions. And so I contacted a expert in people who use music about Aboriginality or Indigenous music in Australia, and he advised me, gave me advice that as long as I make my own sounds, it's okay. So what I did was make sure I used sounds which were appropriate to the area of Central Australia, and instead of borrowing something, the secret was to make my own sounds, which means they were my sounds, and therefore there was no ethical issue.
Interesting. I'd like to break down that. So I'm sure you looked at some of the theoretical aspects of the Indigenous music and then used it to your instrumentation. Interesting.
No, I didn't. Not really. I mean, I think I sort of, I mean, in many ways you're driven by the script in these type of projects. So you may think you have some leeway, but the script was pretty clear. It sort of generated a certain role for the music, which was very clear. And so I used the only sound that was related to Aboriginal music what that means. It's, I mean, Aboriginal music is such a loose, it's like African music. It's like, it represents so many different cultures within that
Great.
one term. So I made my own beating stick sound, like a woodblock, totally from digital synthesis. So therefore therefore it was my sound, and it was not appropriating, and it worked quite well in relationship to this expansive string orchestra sound, which sort of worked really well with the desert landscape.
Agreed. Richard Vella is also a founding artistic director of the Calculated Risks opera productions. The ethos underpinning Calculated Risk was based on collaboration and group-devised work. Calculated Risk has premiered 3 of his major works: Hail of Love 1991-2002, The Last Supper 1993, and Body Songs The Fat Man Tour 1998, an excerpt of which we see here, which I would love to cover, by the way. I love the diversity of your compositions. George Gershwin, when he was asked about what inspires him, he said, "A call with my publisher with work and finances." Do you come from that perspective, or do you more have an idea in your head and then you seek institutional support to make that manifest?
Both, really. Depends on what my needs are. Sometimes I write music purely as a professional serving someone else's agenda, like in film or theatre or something like that. And there your job is to serve that person's work. Other times, though, the music can be very personal, and so therefore I'll do something. I might apply for a grant or do something else to support my habit, like become a university academic for a few years, so I can actually write my own chamber music, which won't make any money. So you have to be absolutely pragmatic. You know, it depends on the context, you see. So it's both for me.
I like your answer, where there are some things that come from your mind, there are some things where you're serving a larger vision, and I can agree. You know, institutional support, academic support has made it so you can get some amazing things done to explore.
Well, in Australia, you can only survive in Australia with a portfolio approach. You can't, there's not enough people in a country, there's not enough funding around, it's highly competitive, so you have to have a portfolio career, which could be anything from teaching, performing, composing, arranging, who knows. But for me, it's been a combination of, really it's been, on average, every 5 years, I tend to shift from being a professional in the industry, like having worked for Warner's and having done feature films, and then after 5 years saying, oh, I want to go back into the university and lick my wounds. And so I might do that for 5 years, and then after that I might say, no, I'm tired of being a professor, I'll go back into the industry again. And that's been the story of my life, really.
My hope is that young artists, hearing your good words, see a successful map laid out so they can see examples and see how they can modify their own life. I think it's critical for young artists to hear your perspective, and that a part of your work will have to be self-initiated, and that innovation is rewarded. Most of my work has been created by an idea, then made manifest. There's not a lot of listings in the papers for composers and producers like us. And speaking just lightly of the entrepreneurial spirit in the young artists in 2020, what are your feelings on the new perspective that going to uni for a fine arts degree is a waste of funds?
No, I don't think it's a waste of money at all. I think if you want to do it, go for it, because the beauty of studying music is that it puts you into new contexts, it challenges you, you meet new people, opens up possibilities, pathways, connections. A lot of people, when they go to study, it lays the groundwork for the next 20 years for their connections and things. So absolutely, I would support it. It boils down to, if that's what you want to do it. You know, you don't have to go to university to have a musical career. I mean, a lot of my research has shown with the music export that some of the most successful musicians in Australia, like this is at the top level,
Yeah.
haven't got a music qualification. So I think it boils down to, if that's what you want to do, and go for it, make the most of it, and it will pay off.
Okay, thanks, great answer. And that's a big debate going around the world right now, so it's good to hear your good words. This next step is fun. We were talking about CCAR. From 2013 to 2019, Richard Vella directed the Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Research Group Collaborative Environments for Creative Arts Research, known as CCAR. The research activities in CCAR embrace music and phenomenology, performance, composition, music production, interactive technologies, art science intersections, and the music industry. CCAR was also awarded in 2015 an Australian Research Council linkage grant for the Born Global Report. The report investigates the cultural and export value of the Australian music export. The industry report for this project was completed in July 2019, and it examines national and international policy frameworks, new business models, and the music entrepreneur and export value of Australian music. Through CCAR, he was also the artistic director of the International Space-Time Concerto Competition in 2012, a cutting-edge concerto competition that embraced historical practices with new innovations in performance. One innovation was the use of telematic synchronized performances in which 5 countries from 5 different time zones performed various types of concerti in real time, having an uncanny relevance to today's online delivery due to COVID-19. The competition researched the role of latency for music performances that involved high levels of interactivity. Here, let's take a look.
Why we called the competition the Space-Time Concerto Competition was because we were looking at what happens in a performance of music in a space when the audience and the performers are either in the same space together, or in the case of the telematic side of it, where the audiences and performers are spaced out across the world. So space-time means how does a sound exist in time and a space? So the telematic side of it is looking at musicians around the world performing to a conductor over the internet.
In the space-time competition, we used a combination of different types of technologies. They included open source technologies as well as technologies that are commercially available as a product. Some of these were software technologies, such as the use of Jack. We used Jack Trip specifically for low latency audio, and then other forms of technology we used, such as Polycom video conferencing products, which are hardware devices for video. By using a combination of the various different forms of technologies of open source hardware and software, we were able to give the audience perception that we were working with no latency for music performance.
Latency is the problem of delay in a performance of music. Every piece of music has latency. As I'm talking, there's latency because it takes time for the sound of my voice to reach the ears of the other person. However, the further the distance between people, the longer the latency. So obviously in an orchestra, there's latency because the people at the back of the orchestra it takes time for their sound to be heard at the front. That's inherent in any performance. With the internet, it's much slower because the sound has to travel around the world at the speed of light, and it gets slowed down by certain technologies and passes. So we sometimes have a situation with the telematic side of things where the latency could be up to 2 seconds.
1, 2, 3, 4. Wow, that's a second delay. My God.
So absence fitted perfectly for this latency problem, in the sense that we had musicians around the world performing whose presence was being acknowledged by not being there. So where our problem was, we had musicians in Beijing, in Linz, in Singapore and Newcastle having to work together to a common beat. And we did that by having a conductor who conducted without hearing anything, and then other conductors in each location conducting to the video. And Absence explored 2 approaches to time. One was using a beat, and another part which was what they call non-metrical, where there was no sense of meter or beat. And the challenge of the work was to put those 2 together.
Richard, First, I'm impressed with your handling of the latency issues, and it's fun to see the glint in your eye as you discuss it, especially working with beat, which is one thing, but then no beat and no meter. This was a successful international production online in 2012. That was 8 years ago, and it feels so prescient now. Is there any conversation to resurrect this type of production relative to the current pandemic?
It was great looking at that again, brought back a lot of fond memories. What we did was really complicated because we had, as Nathan there, who was part of the process, we said, is that we had to separate the sound from the visuals, and we used a software developed by Stanford University called Jack Trip, and that gives you really high quality audio over the internet. And you might notice in that video you saw there was a conductor, the main conductor. He was conducting in a little black booth to a camera. He wasn't hearing anything, he was just imagining the music as he was conducting the score. Right. And then we had these conductors around the world conducting from him with their musicians in front of them. And then that was all remixed back in again to produce this amazingly, almost, you would say, oh, they're all in the same place. But actually, in reality, there was latency all over the place when you look at how the conductors work.
Oh, my mind's blown and just staggered by how much that must have taken to pull off.
And there's been a lot of research around latency. You can't ever get rid of it. It's just impossible to get rid of. I don't know whether, I mean, there are people looking at software programs where you would have a conductor, it's a visual representation. There are people doing that around the world. But a lot of what people are doing now, it seems to be they're performing to some type of click track, which is then all mixed together after the fact. And that's great, but it's not quite the same.
No, and it's funny is what you're talking about is, multi-track audio and video. And
it's fantastic. I don't have any problem with it. But what we did was probably a little bit out on the, the resources were huge because the conductor was in Austria. We had people in Singapore, Beijing, Wellington, Western Australia. It was everywhere. Yeah.
One other part of CCAR that I want to touch upon is the Born Global report, which I had quite interest. CCAR was awarded in 2015 with an Australian Research Council linkage grant for Born Global, Australian Music Exports, which brings together for the first time a representation of the economic and cultural impacts of Australian music internationally, offers the first benchmark figure for the total value of Australian music imports. This report provides an important opportunity to recognize the achievements of the Australian music industry and to consider its future potential. At first, I was a little skeptical when I came to this report. And then, first page, Richard, I read this. The music export industry has the potential for further growth, deeper connections, and continued cultural exchange. The research shows that, this is bold, relatively modest investments from government and industry have had a powerful multiplier effect, which I believe you said was $1.8 to $8.
That's not official. That's
yeah, we're just but
it's a good. I mean, that's a good dinner party conversation, but we haven't got the actual figure on that. But something like in Canada, it's like 1 to 5. One for every dollar, $5 comes back. UK has a similar type of figure. We tried to measure it, but it was very difficult because it was hard to get access to people's income streams. And so what we did was estimate that the value of the Australian music export is around $195 million a year, but in actual fact, it's probably twice as that, up to 400 to 500 million. And you could safely say that there is a multiplier effect that for every dollar you put in, you can, I would go out there and say, for every dollar you put in, $8 comes back. But so yes, the government has been very supportive in these areas. I mean, Sounds Australia is sort of the equivalent of Australia's Music Export Office, and they're doing a fantastic job on minimal budget. And but the whole thing's changing now because, I mean, the COVID-19 has basically has blown the export industry out of the water for the moment. Yeah.
Which is interesting because I also understand that your current work on this subject is the co-authoring of a book based on your recent research of the Australian music export routledge in the UK. And so can you tell us how the research on this subject of the Australian music exports has changed post-COVID? And can you give any advice to our audience who might be struggling artistically at this time?
I don't think I know where it's going to go. It's because we're still in it, not in a post-COVID thing. But I think the reason why we called it Born Global is because as soon as you go on the internet, you're a global phenomenon. However, it's not as easy as that. You know, a lot of work has to go into it. No one person can do it on your own. You need a team around you. So my first recommendation to anyone who's aspiring is get a manager. The manager is the glue that holds it all together. They're the ones who organise the deals to allow you to write music and perform music. Now, currently touring's been shot off the map. You can't tour. But I think the most important thing to realise about making a career in music, especially export, because in Australia, the only way you're going to really survive is as an exporter. Because of digital analytics, you can work out that, oh, look, these people in Poland are playing my music because of, they're downloading it on through streaming or something like that. So you can actually target these international markets quite easily. But the manager is the person who's going to do the deals. But the most important thing is to realise is, one is, what's the value you place in your music? And secondly, that if you value that music, other people will value, which means you've got to find out who are those people, which means it's about networking. And if you don't, and networking is absolutely fundamental to the music industry. You cannot survive without networking because music is a social participatory activity. It involves people, whether they're listening or performing or building with it or something like that. So the more you network and understand the different value chains that are with networks, the more you'll make it work. But I keep coming back. It's all about representation, which means get a manager.
Give thanks for your good words. And also, Donald Passman writing the book, The Business of Music, required reading for some music business people. The first chapter is get a manager, get a team. And in all the editions printed have been since. And speaking of books, I'd like to move on to your book, Sounds in Space, Sounds in Time, which is a groundbreaking exploration of the world of sound and music. Particularly useful as a secondary and tertiary level teachers, it is a thought-provoking journey in listening, improvising, and composing for anyone who wants to understand music better. Can you give us an overview of this book?
I think the secret's in the title, Sounds in Space, Sounds in Time, because in order for you to hear a sound, it has to resonate in some spatial environment, and when you hear a sound, it takes time to hear it. So that's sort of the fundamental way. And I wrote the book at a time when I could see an emerging crisis in higher education, because university funding models were based on students, any number of students, like bums on seats.
Yeah.
Now, older model of the elite model, like Juilliard School or Sydney Conservatoire, Melbourne, so that's all going because you need to have students to justify your pay, your salaries, which meant you had to have students from different backgrounds. And so I wrote a book which was about listening and understanding music from so many different perspectives, and it wasn't based on any one special tradition. And the way I did that was to look at the model of sound in space and how we listen to that.
I know you've written this in a bit, but I'm just curious, can you give us any small words on the modules and how you broke this book down to present it to us?
Yeah, well, the modules, there's the first four are really about the nature of sound and how we listen to it, and the last part is about texture. So what I did was get people to develop a critical listening approach to sound, be it the sound of someone hitting a table with a pen, and what does that mean, or the sound of water. And it's no different to listening to a violin or electric guitar. They all have a beginning, middle, end. I call it, attack, sustain, delay, release.
ASDR. Yeah.
And I think people underestimate the complexity of that and how we listen to it automatically. Like, for example, if you're in bed at night and all of a sudden you hear broken glass, your listening becomes incredibly focused and refined, and you know what to listen for. Or if you're at a party, they call it the cocktail party effect, where you hear someone talking about you on the other side of the room and everyone's talking. You learn to focus in on it. We are incredibly sophisticated listeners, and this book is about how to develop that level of sophistication to all types of music and sound. So there's no difference between listening to a river flow and all its complexities of harmonics and rhythms and things like that, as opposed to listening to the Moldau by Smetana, which is about the river. You know.
It's funny is that is an esoteric perspective, but it's one that I embrace highly, to the point that if my wife is saying okay in a major third, I know she's okay. If she says minor third, I know we got issues. Moving on, I'd like to talk our final exploration here in the multifaceted world of Richard Vella. This is a fun series. The A to Z of Spiritual Music: A User's Guide. Now, this was commissioned by the Australian Council for the Arts and produced by the ABC Classic FM. Slightly ironic in conception and composed from a humanist perspective, the A to Z of Spiritual Music: A User's Guide is a collection of sounds, images, memories, definitions, and anecdotes. While not exhaustive, its encyclopedic approach lists various concepts underpinning the Western spiritual ethos and techniques used by composers and musicians to invoke this ethos. Richard explores alphabetical titles in the A to Z, such as A for absence, E for enthusiasm, F for flight. Let's take a peek. Richard, I see that the earliest of this series is 1986, and then the most recent one is, I believe, 2006. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is this an ongoing commission or not? And can you tell us some of the philosophy behind this?
Well, I think you've uncovered my secret, which is a very common secret by many composers, is that they, in order to survive, you recycle. So in 2005, I was commissioned to do this work by the ABC and the Australia Council. And what I did was a compendium of all my music going back to the early 80s and made it fit an encyclopedia approach around that. So what I did was look at sort of the techniques composers use, like, for example, and like if you work in film, especially in film, you get a director that says, I want something far away. And you say, well, what does that mean? It usually means it's soft, or most people in the film industry and the theatre don't have a language for music. So what I did was create like an encyclopedia of techniques that composers use, like hope is a sense of rising scales. Depression obviously is going down the other way. So then it became this incredible, like a lexicon of all these different techniques, composers, and I used my own music to show it all. And then after a while, once you get used to it, you start to sort of listen to any piece of music and you say, oh, that's what's going on. And almost like the music's telling you how to listen to it.
That is brilliant. That is a brilliant idea, good friend. I want to thank Richard Vella, composer, academic, for his time exploring his many artistic offerings, insights, and advice, and for the advice he's given our community. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Martin.
In a fortnight, Hobsons Bay ArtSpeak will be hosted by my colleague, Michelle Kroll, and we will discuss some of our artistic experiences internationally and some of the work I am doing now serving Australians in the Australian arts community. And that will be July 16th, 6:30 to 7:15 p.m. Again, my name is Martin Case, your host for Hobsons Bay ArtSpeak with Richard Vella. Thank you for watching Hobsons Bay ArtSpeak, proudly supported by the Creative City Hobsons Bay through the Art Apart New Rapid Response Initiative. Take care and be safe.